You are listening to Commission 6-8.
It is Thursday, October 30th in the greatest country on earth. I'm your host, Randy Millette, and this is Commission 6-8. Today, we are talking about the falsehood of toxic masculinity. I have an awesome story for you today about Daniel Boone, and as always, we're going to see what the Bible has to say about it. So let's go! All right, everybody, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. We have a lot to talk about today, but first, I would like to ask you, if you are enjoying the show, and if you enjoy the podcast, please help us get the word out. Send it to somebody you know. Send it to somebody you think might like it. Post it on social media. Always remember to send us a text. Give us feedback. Let me know how I'm doing. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, reach out to me. In fact, I just booked my first guest. He's going to be coming up in a couple episodes, and it's somebody very exciting. I'm not ready to disclose it yet, but I have a great guest from our first guest. I'm going to interview him. That's going to be a great show, so stay tuned. But today, we are going to be talking about toxic masculinity, and the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is 2 nights ago, Monday night, I went to LSU to the Turning Point USA event, where the speaker was Allie Beth Stuckey, who is the host of a podcast, Relatable. She does a lot of events with Turning Point USA. She was personal friends with Charlie Kirk. She's the author of a book called Toxic Empathy. And if you like this show, chances are you're probably going to like hers. She's a born-again Christian. She's a conservative. And I think her podcast is actually under the Christian category. But she gave an excellent speech. And if you've ever been to a Turning Point USA event, then you'll be familiar with the format where the keynote speaker comes up and gives a 20 to 30 minute speech. And then after that, they do the question and answer portion of the event where people line up in the aisle and they get to the microphone, they get to ask questions. Sometimes they present an opposing point of view, which leads to a debate. I will say this crowd at LSU, there was 5,000 people there, and really no one, with the exception of one person, had an opposing point of view or a dissenting opinion. Everyone there was excited to be there. Everyone there was a very patriotic atmosphere. It was a very Christian atmosphere. And lots of the questions were, there was a lot of young girls asking advice from Allie. There was other people. They had other students from NOBTS. They had students from Tulane, Loyola, which we've seen Loyola is actually blocking the students from starting a Turning Point USA chapter. That was in the news. But overall, the event was excellent. If you've never been to a Turning Point USA event, I highly recommend that you attend one. Of course, I've never been to one when Charlie Kirk was still alive. I'm sure it was electric. And I had planned on going to the one at LSU even before he was assassinated. But Allie Beth did a great job, and she gave a great speech. And the title of her speech was Charlie Kirk's Top 5 Controversial Truths. And she took what she called the top 5 controversial things that he would say or opinions that he had, which she agreed with. And she sort of repurposed them and explained them from her point of view. And I'm going to talk about the first 2. Now, the entire event was recorded. It's on YouTube. You can see the whole thing in its entirety, and I highly recommend that you do. But I'm going to talk about the first 2 points that she made. And number 1 is feminism has failed women. So listen to this clip.
First one, feminism has failed women. First one, feminism has failed women. Now, feminism in theory might sound good because it's supposed to be about equality. And we like recognizing the equal value of people, of course, but in practice, it has nothing to do with equality. It doesn't have to do with being equal to men. It has to do with being the same as a man. It has fed us this lie that in order to be respected, that we women have to talk like men, that we have to act like men, that we have to be like men. And feminism has been advertised to us as pro-woman. But the ideology over the past several decades has convinced us has attempted to convince us that babies are a burden, femininity is weak, and gender is a construct.
Now, I couldn't agree with that more. And I'm going to take it one step further. I would even venture to say that feminism, the feminist movement, was never about equality for women. Of course, we agree with equality for women. Of course, we agree that women should have equal rights and the right to vote and things of that nature. But feminism was never about women's equality. Feminism was about undermining the family unit. Feminism was about taking mothers out of the home. Feminism was not about giving women an equal right to work, but in conjunction with promoting a lifestyle where people live above their means, it forced the woman out of the house and into the workforce because you know as well as I do, it is very difficult, if not impossible, for a family to make it on a one-income salary. So then with both parents out of the house, you have the children left to be raised by strangers and to be raised by the school system, which the information is funneled from the government. So now you have the government raising your children instead of the mother and the father. And this was all made possible under the guise of feminism and women's right to work. And it wasn't right to work. It was forcing women into the workforce. But then she takes it one step further, and this is something that I've never put together, but this was excellent. Listen to this clip.
Feminism has spent billions of dollars glorifying abortion and promoting promiscuity, and it's left each and every one of its followers lonelier and more broken. Feminism laid the groundwork for transgenderism because you cannot get to a woman can be a man without first believing that a woman can be like a man.
So here she explains that feminism was not only a disservice to women, but it actually laid the foundation and gave rise to the transgender movement that we're seeing. Because, as she said, you can't get from a woman can be a man until first you establish that a woman is just like a man. And women were not made to be just like men. Women were not made to do what men do. Women have strengths that men don't have. And that's why God designed the family unit for the husband and wife to complement each other for the purpose of raising children. Now, I'm not saying that a woman's place is barefoot and pregnant. I mean, look at the woman giving the speech, Allie Beth. She's a very successful, very prominent, very public figure, a very successful woman. But she did not sacrifice being a wife and being a mother for the sake of her career. In fact, she will tell you that being a wife and being a mother is her first priority, and her strong family unit is what propelled her into a successful career. But in addition to laying the groundwork for transgenderism, feminism is actually at the forefront of the war against men and the weakening of men and the demonization of everything that is masculine and the term toxic masculinity. Because after all, if a woman can do everything a man can do, and then now a woman can be a man, then what do we need men for? So they've demonized men, and you see it everywhere. If you look, any show you watch, it started with sitcoms in the 80s. The dad is always the buffoon. He's always an idiot. He's always the comic relief, right? Because there's no use for him. He's lazy, and that's what they've perpetuated, is that men are lazy, men are useless, and they're unneeded. Now, men are not innocent in this because the sad fact is that increasingly men are participating in the perpetuation of this lie, and men are not taking their rightful place in the home as leaders and protectors and providers. So now let's look at her second point.
Second one, are you ready? Are you ready? Porn has weakened men. And you know, Charlie was so good at talking about this and so good at talking so courageously and sternly and clearly to the young men. Here's what we know about porn and why it is so detrimental, not only to men, although it disproportionately affects men. Porn objectifies women and children. It commercializes sex, which is a gift from God for a married couple between one man and one woman, and it glorifies violence. It creates addiction and shame. It destroys marriages. It ruins your perception of other people. It is the legal loophole for sex trafficking. It is evil in every way, and it will destroy your life. And this is what I would want to say to men, and I hope that you hear it from strong men in your life, that men, we need you. And we need your masculinity, and we need your strength, and we need your boldness, and we need your courage, and we need those things to be harnessed for good. We need you to be solid pastors. We need you to be strong leaders. We need your voice. We need you to bravely stand up for the most vulnerable, to stand up for women and children and for the unborn, to raise a respectful ruckus for the things that matter. We need really strong men, and porn makes you weak.
Today's sponsor is freespoke.com. Freespoke.com is a search engine web browser that you need to be using like today, right? We know that Google and Meta, big tech, they've all admitted to censoring political speech. And we know that they collect and sell your data. At FreeSpoke, they give you both sides to every story. They give you all the information. They give you political perspectives, and they label media bias left, right, or middle, so you know the information that you're consuming. When we do research for these shows, my producer and I exclusively use freespoke.com. Now, you can download the app and start browsing today for free. But if you want an ad-free experience, subscribe and give them promo code COM68. That's promo code COM, COM68. That will give you 35% off a yearly subscription. So make the switch today, use freespoke.com, and let's hold big tech accountable. That's freespoke.com. Think for yourself. Now, I think I would be hard-pressed to find anybody who's listening that would advocate on behalf of pornography. Now, maybe you haven't seen the dangers in it, but at the very least, I don't think anyone would come on and say that pornography is healthy. But in addition to pornography, which I do believe, everything she said, I agree with her. I believe that pornography has weakened men. I believe that it distorts your perception of reality. And I believe that it disservices you in many ways. In fact, there have been studies saying that it actually rewires your brain and prevents you from performing in marriage. But in addition to that, there are a lot of things that weaken men. And in addition to pornography, also hypersexuality, feminism, right? We've already talked about that. Cultural distractions. There's no shortage of cultural distractions, you know, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with taking a break once in a while or enjoying yourself, but I've seen men spend hours upon hours upon hours playing PlayStation, playing Xbox, right? Not reading books, not increasing your intelligence, but just distracting yourself from the day-to-day. And taking a break is fine, but when that's all you're doing, that's not a break anymore. That's a lifestyle. And the whole idea is the distractions take men away from their rightful place in the home. They take men away from being leaders. They take men away from producing or doing things productive or self-improving. Because a man needs purpose in life. Men need purpose. And if a man doesn't have a purpose, if he gets too comfortable in social distractions, then he becomes ineffective. Right? Another thing that's weakened men tremendously is the accusation of toxic masculinity and the demonization of masculinity. I mean, a weak man is a useless man, right? If we look at women and children have intrinsic value. And what I mean by that is women and children are valued just because they're women and children, right? When the ship's going down, women and children exit first. Men don't have that. Men have to prove their value. A man's value is based on his ability to provide and to protect, because a man in the family unit, which is designed by God, is the provider and the protector. So if a man doesn't offer those things, then of what use is he? A weak man is a useless man. Look, did y'all see this story? I'm going to read you this news story. In Arizona, on July 9th in 2024, a father of three was arrested after leaving his youngest child in the car, who was 2 years old, while he sat inside playing video games and searching for pornography on his PlayStation. The criminal complaint said that the temperature inside the vehicle that afternoon reached 109 degrees Fahrenheit, and his daughter died. His 2-year-old daughter baked to death at 109 degrees in the car while he was inside watching pornography and playing his PlayStation. Now, this was in the news again because he just accepted a plea deal, but this is not the first time he's done this. in the court documents, they showed text messages from his wife who was begging him to stop leaving them in the car. She was also railing against him, saying that he replaced cocaine with alcohol. So I guess there was a pattern where he would come home, and if the child was sleeping, he would leave the car running, but the car shuts off after 30 minutes. So the kid's sleeping in the car seat, he leaves the car running, goes inside, starts playing his PlayStation, starts watching porn, and now he has a dead kid, and he has to live with that for the rest of his life. Here's a tip. Women, stop marrying man babies. Okay? That's not a man. That's not a leader of the household. He's not a protector, and he's not a provider. Stop marrying man babies who are addicted to cocaine and pornography and PlayStation and are not providing for their children or their family. Now, if you look at these 2 points by Allie, Beth, this is really two sides of the same coin. Women are told that they don't need a man and to prioritize a career over motherhood or being a wife. And men are told that they're not worthy of a successful woman. And by virtue of being male, that there's something wrong with them. Right? How do you render a whole generation useless of useless men? You start when they're children, and you tell them just because of their masculinity, just because of virtue of being born a male, that there's something wrong with them, that they have to control themselves and tame themselves and make themselves less masculine. Right? The rise of transgenderism. Problems in society don't come from strong leaders. They come from weak men. Men who embrace victimhood and men who prioritize distraction over self-improvement. Men don't become strong men by accident. They are trained to be men from their childhood, from when they were boys. That's why it's so important to have a man in the household. It's important for daughters, right? We've seen what happens to daughters who don't have good dads or don't have father figures. Well, the same's true for boys. If they don't have men or father figures to look up to, they don't become strong men by accident. Children need strong men in their life. Men are called to be the representative of God to their family. Now, I'm not saying men are God. Men are not gods. There's one God. But when God designed the family unit, the representative of God to his family is the father. Men lead their family according to the will of God. Training men to do that starts when they are children. Did you know that people's natural perception of God is directly correlated to their perception of their earthly father? So when someone imagines God, because he's abstract, we can't see him, but when someone imagines God, their perception of God is related to the perception of their earthly father. So if they had a bad earthly father, then they naturally don't have a good perception of God. They had a strong earthly father, they naturally have a strong perception of God. Now, of course, that can be overcome, and men are fallible. Every dad makes mistakes. God never makes mistakes. So through education and through the Bible and through the Word, we learn that God is perfect and God is love, and no earthly father could ever measure up to what God is. But the representation of God to the family is the earthly father. But society wants to tell you that men don't have a purpose. And the reason they want to tell you that men are useless and men don't have a purpose is because ultimately they want you to believe that God doesn't have a purpose. The most powerful thing a godly woman can do is demand the leadership of her husband and demand that her husband take his rightful place in the leadership of the home and fatherhood of his children. Accountability and support from his family is what drives a man to reach for things greater than himself. It drives a man to become something greater than himself. It drives a man to constantly seek self-improvement and to reach beyond his bounds and to create and to protect and to provide. Everything that a man can be, the best that a man can be, is a loving protector to his wife and children. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I have an awesome story for you guys about Daniel Boone and about how he inspired young men, children who weren't even men yet, to take their rightful place and be the protectors that they were born to be. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Commission 6-8. You are listening to Commission 6-8.
All right, guys, welcome back and buckle up because I am about to tell you an awesome story today of one of my favorite characters in American history, one of my favorite players in the American frontier. But first, I want to put a warning label on it because if you are a man and you are listening to this and you consider yourself manly or masculine, perhaps you're a hunter or an outdoorsman type, you're about to get really humbled because the standard in which we consider masculinity today pales in comparison to characters like Daniel Boone in the American frontier. These people forged into the wilderness and built a world out of nothing. And we don't know the struggle. We don't come close, right? The worst part of my day is when I have to reheat my coffee in the microwave. But these men were faced with the task of survival daily. They needed enough meat for the winter. They needed to build a fort to protect themselves from intruders and from Indians and from hostiles. They had to protect their families. They did this on a day in, day out. They had disease, weather, all things that they had to contend with every day to build a world for future generations. And we don't come close. Anyway, in 1773, Daniel Boone and his fellow settlers established a settlement in Kentucky on the edge of the American frontier known as Boonesborough. And of course, in 1776, the United States wrote the Declaration of Independence and declared war against Great Britain. And by 1777, as war waged in the colonies with George Washington and the American regulars against Cornwallis and the British troops, there was another front of the American Revolution taking place in the frontier of Kentucky. The British had allied with the Shawnee Indians, and they were desperately trying to create another front in the American Revolution and divide American forces. But the United States did not have the manpower to dispatch troops to Kentucky to defend the settlers, so the defense of the settlements was left to people like Daniel Boone and other settlers in the area. Now, there was a contingent of Shawnee warriors led by Chief Blackfish who would often cross the Ohio River into Kentucky and attack the settlements. During one of these attacks, Daniel Boone's own daughters were kidnapped, and Daniel Boone and some other men set out, tracked down the kidnappers, and returned his daughters back to Boonesborough. In April of 1776, there was another attack where Daniel Boone was shot in the ankle. His ankle was shattered, and he was laid up for months. But this was the struggle that the settlers faced in Kentucky during the Revolutionary War. Then in 1778, Daniel Boone led a group of men toward Ohio to what's called the Blue Licks along the Licking River. They went to go gather salt. This is the type of struggle that these settlers faced. They needed salt to keep the meat throughout the winter. But to gather salt, it was a very tedious and painstaking process, and it required just about every man that was in the settlement. And what they would do is they went to the Blue Licks, and they would get water, brackish water. They would boil it down till all the water evaporated. Then they would scrape the salt out of the pot. This was expected to take about a month. And then they would get all that salt, and they would carry it back to the settlement, and that salt would be used to preserve the meat. So without the salt, they can't preserve the meat. Without the meat, the settlement dies. And the reason Boone and his men decided to do this in February was because they didn't want to leave the settlement undefended during the summer months where Blackfish and the Shawnee could attack. However, during this salt-gathering trip, Boone's worst fears were realized. They were found and captured by the Shawnee. Blackfish and his men found themselves in a very rare situation. They had stumbled upon all the men that would be defending Boonesborough. They surprised them and were able to capture them, and they were about to kill them and then head to Boonesborough and drive out the settlement and probably kill all the settlers. However, Daniel Boone started talking and convinced them that they had more men back at the settlement, which of course was not true. And then Boone began to negotiate for the lives of his men. And Blackfish's condition was to have Daniel Boone run the gauntlet. Now, if you don't know what the gauntlet is, that's where the Indian warriors would line up on either side, and Daniel Boone would run down the middle while being clubbed and beaten and whipped and hit with sticks from either side by Indians until he reached the very end where the biggest Indian would be standing there with a tomahawk. So Daniel Boone agreed to it. And he runs the gauntlet, gets beaten to a pulp, and when he gets to the end, the Indian standing there with the tomahawk, Daniel Boone rushes him and wrestles the tomahawk away from him and saves his life. In fact, it was so impressive that all the Indians that were watching, including Blackfish, started cheering and praising Daniel Boone for his bravery and courage. And it was because of this that Blackfish ultimately decided to take them prisoner instead of killing them all and heading to Boonesborough. For the next 4 months, Boone and his men were in captivity to the Shawnee. But the entire time, Daniel Boone, burdened with the knowledge that Boonesborough was left undefended and summer was coming, he knew that he would have to eventually plan and execute an escape to get back and defend his children and his settlement. Now, even though he was a prisoner of war, Blackfish was so impressed with Boone's bravery and skills as a woodsman that he had adopted him as a son. They also allowed Daniel Boone to go hunting for the tribe, but this is how they would do it. They loaned him a rifle and they gave him enough powder for one shot and only one musket ball. But even with only one shot, every time he went on these hunting trips, he was successful. In fact, he was such a skilled woodsman and hunter that he would use these trips to help him plan his escape. What he would do was he only used half the amount of powder that they gave him, which meant he had to get even closer to the animal he was trying to kill. And he would save the rest of the powder and he stored it up for his eventual escape. In addition to that, once he killed an animal, he would rush over there and dig out the musket ball, and he was saving them and hiding them from the Indians. So now he was building up his own little ammunition store, preparing for his eventual escape. And that day would come in June of 1778 when Daniel Boone overheard Blackfish having a conversation about heading to Boonesborough and overtaking the settlement. Daniel Boone knew that this was a day and he had to make his escape. So in the middle of the night, he was able to procure a barrel and lock mechanism of a rifle, along with the bullets that he had saved and the powder. He made his escape and he set out on foot to cover 160 miles as quickly as he could. The Shawnee immediately gave chase, but Boone, who had traveled about the first 40 miles on horseback, eventually turned the horse loose to try and gain some distance between him and the Shawnee. And in 4 days, he would cover 160 miles from Ohio to his settlement of Boonesborough in Kentucky. And along the way, without food or provisions or being able to prepare for the trip, he managed to carve the stock of a rifle out of a tree trunk and used the barrel and the lock mechanism that he had stolen from the Shawnee. And with a makeshift rifle and only one shot, while running from Indians who were trying to kill him, he took down a buffalo, ate the meat raw and on the run, and made it back to Boonesborough in less than 4 days, 160 miles on foot, running from Indians. I'm talking about a man, people. We do not measure up. Are you kidding me? This is the type of man that made it possible for you to stand in line at Starbucks and get your latte. The greatest thing a man can have in his life is purpose. The greatest thing a man can be is a protector and a provider. And this is on display by Daniel Boone. But the story's not over. Daniel Boone eventually makes it back to Boonesborough, right, in under 4 days. And then by September, Blackfish and his Indians decide to attack. However, if you remember, all the men got captured while they were out gathering salt. So Daniel Boone, with under 40 men, the rest were children, defended the fort against an attack by Blackfish and the Shawnee. In fact, he had women dress up as men and walk around carrying rifles, and he put children, boys, under the age of 12 on the wall with a rifle, going door to door, pulling them out of their homes, saying, "You're a man now. It's time to defend your family." That's manhood, ladies and gentlemen. That is masculinity. You're telling me there's something toxic about that? You're telling me that we have to somehow tame the things that made it possible for us to have the life that we live? After 9 days of fighting, Blackfish, unable to take Boonesborough, gave up and returned to Ohio. Daniel Boone, with a group of children, with a group of young men, successfully defended the settlement and defended the people of Boonesborough. To the men that are listening, this is your heritage. Act accordingly. Let's take a quick break.
You are listening to Commission 6-8. You are listening to Commission 6-8.
In Proverbs 23, verse 7, it says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." So I want to ask you today, what is it that consumes your thoughts? What is it that consumes the desire of your heart? Are you dedicated to self-improvement? Are you dedicated to drawing closer to God? Are you dedicated to making the lives of those around you better? Or are you distracted? Are you giving in to social distractions? Are you letting the world tell you that you're not worthy and therefore rendering you useless? As Christians, our call is to further the kingdom of heaven. So the desire of our heart, the word also says that God gives us the desires of our heart. And I believe that means that he implants them in us. So as we draw closer to God, he gives us a desire to reach beyond our bounds. He gives us a desire to further the kingdom. He gives us the desire and the ability to do things that we wouldn't naturally be able to do. So whether you're a man or a woman, you have a call of God on your life. And it's essential for us to allow God to transform us into usable vessels to further his kingdom. Allow God to do a work in us. See, what the world has wrong in lots of areas is that we need to accept who we are. The world also tells us to listen to our heart. Your heart is deceitful. The word says that your heart is deceitful. But we allow God to give us the desires of our heart and transform us into willing vessels, usable vessels, to further his kingdom. We're not supposed to stay where we are. We're supposed to constantly seek self-improvement. We're supposed to constantly seek to draw closer to him. I want to tell you, don't be satisfied with the status quo. Reach beyond your bounds. Let God develop gifts and talents and use you to make a difference. Let God develop something in you that wasn't previously there. I know I say this often, but I do it because it's true and because it's important. We were made in the image of God. Don't let the world define your image. Make your image more godlike. Live according to your purpose and live according to God's plan. I don't know if you've ever heard of the cycle of an empire, but it goes like this. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. So which one are we? What mark is our generation going to leave? Are we going to be weak men who create hard times for future generations? Or are we going to stand up in the face of adversity and stand up for what's right? Are we going to stand up for the unborn? Are we going to stand up for the rights and principles of American citizens, of Christians? One of my next episodes is going to be about the Christian genocide happening right now in Nigeria. We hear all kinds of outcry right now about the war in Gaza and Palestinian genocide, but the same people that are hollering about that aren't saying a word about Christians getting killed by the thousands in Nigeria. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. But what mark is our generation going to leave? What mark are you going to leave on this world? Are we just going to go through life asleep at the wheel? Or are we going to let God use us to improve our lives and improve the lives of others? I'm so excited for what God's doing right now, and I hope that this encouraged you. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And thank you again for listening to me today. And I pray blessings. I pray blessings over you and your family. I pray God blesses you coming in and you're going out. I pray peace, power, and prosperity. And remember, you live in the greatest country on earth, and it's up to you to keep it.
This has been Commission 6-8.
I invite you into the roller coaster ride of my life in the award-winning book, For Such a Time as This, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and how you can too. From the very first page, you'll dive into the raw emotions of ambition and resilience, facing one crushing setback after another. Yet, through each trial, I discovered new depths of determination and learned invaluable lessons in negotiation and perseverance. This isn't just a story about overcoming financial hurdles, it's about the profound personal growth that comes from navigating life's toughest challenges. It's about faith, family, and the unwavering belief that setbacks are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. For such a time as this, how I navigated the world of multifamily real estate to close my first deal, and how you can too, by award-winning author Randy Millette, available on Amazon. I invite you into the roller coaster ride of my life in the award-winning book, For Such a Time as This, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and How You Can Too. From the very first page, you'll dive into the raw emotions of ambition and resilience, facing one crushing setback after another. Yet, through each trial, I discovered new depths of determination and learned invaluable lessons in negotiation and perseverance. This isn't just a story about overcoming financial hurdles, it's about the profound personal growth that comes from navigating life's toughest challenges. It's about faith, family, and the unwavering belief that setbacks are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. For such a time as this, how I navigated the world of multifamily real estate to close my first deal, and how you can too, by award-winning author Randy Millette, available on Amazon.